think, the most impromptu show on the market.
It's the only show where we film the episodes out of order, and after I've gotten high already and Emily has gotten off of her Adderall, and we just start talking about something, and then we just record it, and it's another episode. Here we go.
I'm overstimulated. Expect the long-awaited abolition of my brain.
But if mentally we synchronize, despite what we despise, there's a chance that maybe I won't go insane.
The last thing that you just said, now that we've started recording.
I was saying how, like, I have panic attacks every time I spill the milk, because every time I spilled the milk as a child, I was disciplined.
Right, because the thing that people always argue is they'll always be like, there are two types of parenting. Like, do you think your kids need a parent or do they need a friend? And they're like, one of my exes said that to me at one point, where she was like, I was like, no, I just want to be like, I want to be a friend to my kids. And the response to this always, still, even with my closest friends, are like, kids don't need a friend, they need a parent. Like, you know, if you're going to be their friend, like, good luck raising them. And I'm like, no, but it's not friend versus parent. That's not what it is. Like, what you're talking about is, like, being gentle versus being a disciplinarian. And there's a very healthy balance. You know, like, you can be, you can, like, discipline doesn't have to mean, like, punishment. You know?
Right. And I think there's also... Well, I don't think I know. There's forms of, like, positive discipline, right? Like,
yeah.
Like if your kid spills a gallon of milk on the floor, and you take a moment to step back, and I actually can speak to a lot of this from doing, like, behavior therapy, and because this is some of the stuff that, like, we use when things like this happen. Like, your child spills an entire gallon of milk, and you're upset in the moment. But what we need to do is, your child's going to be looking at you for the reaction.
Yeah.
Right? So if you, in the moment, are going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe, you look at this mess you made now, that child, every time, it only takes one time to do this to someone. Every time that person spills something on the floor, they're going to be, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'll pick it up right now. Dude, accidents happen. If you, in that moment, instead of freaking out, yelling at your kid about spilling something on, like, it's not like they were, like, pouring it out to be malicious.
Right.
You know, like, if you took the moment to be like, all right, hey, accidents happen. Maybe if you went and got a towel, I'll help you pick it up. Or, like, let's try to clean it up this way.
Because that's the next part of it, is, like, it's not a punishment. It's not, you can still establish, like, a situation. You can impose a situation on the child to help them learn and to better them, but that doesn't have to feel negative. In fact, it shouldn't. I'm quoting a little bit from the book Drive that I just read, but, like, give the child autonomy over the situation, where you're saying, hey, what we need to do now, the result is this mess has to get cleaned up. How do you think we should do that? What do you think we should do? And that's what I was
just about to say. Giving them that decision, right? Mm-hmm. Being like, how do you want to clean this up? Or if they don't know, to be like, here, I'll grab you a towel, and, like, to just, like, have them initiate that, because otherwise, like, I'm not going to say that when I'm a parent, you know, that I'm going to be perfect, and I'm not going to have moments of, like,
of course not.
Panic.
But there's a general idea of, like, what you believe in terms of the discipline versus reward
and, like,
system.
I think also it's important to look back on things like, and again, I would never blame my parents, really, for the way that they've reacted in certain situations when they were under stress, and there's just a lot going on. Like, and I know that there was a lot going on, but I definitely can say that there were points where I look back on things now, or I have a reaction to something, and I realize, oh, it's probably because, like, this has happened a couple of times to me, and it really didn't sit right, and now I'm having this conditioned response to this whatever's going on, because this is how I was treated when X, Y, and Z happened. And again, I'm not blaming anybody for how they act under stress or how they parent in that sense, but I'm what I think is important about all of this, and to understand about all of this, is that at the end of the day, children deserve to be able to learn how to and to grow in a safe and supportive environment and not have this fear of not being safe when they're trying to solve problems and learn and grow. And I actually read something really interesting about, when people are like, oh, I'm an empath, right? Like I have this empathic view. I feel people's energy. And there's this really interesting, there's a lot of interesting research on this, but this is basically, this is a trauma response to being a kid in an environment where you didn't feel safe and you didn't feel comfortable, or you had a parent that was very loud or aggressive, because what's happening in that moment is when you come home and you know that you have a parent that's on edge, or even both your parents are on edge, you're going to walk through that front door and you're going to scan that room, because you're going to make sure that you can find a place for yourself subconsciously to feel safe. Is mom on edge? Maybe I should just go over here. Is dad? Oh, dad's like a little upset today.
And so what you
learn, though...
Sorry.
No, it's okay. What you learn in that moment, though, is to do that. And that's why in certain situations, like, I would even say that sometimes I would consider myself an empath, because I definitely go into certain rooms and certain situations and I can pick out the person who's upset first. Mm-hmm. I could tell you who's uncomfortable the moment I walk into the room. And that's because I'm also scanning, because I'm keeping myself safe, right? Like, I'm still in this uncomfortable situation. And the only thing I know how to do to keep myself safe from all of what's going on is to be like, I should remove myself. I should move this way. And what I thought was a really interesting thing between Victor and I, and again, not commenting, I don't know how, I know he's told me things about the way his parents have raised him, but there's differences, obviously, between parents and how they raise their children. Like, not everybody's going to do it the same. But we were watching, for the first time together, we watched Encanto.
Oh,
and
beautiful.
I know, it's so good.
Love
but so
Encanto.
there's a moment in the beginning of the movie where the grandmother looks down and has this like reaction to something. I don't remember exactly what it was.
Oh,
and
it's to the kid. It's
right. But I
at
don't remember
her.
what the situation was that like.
Yeah, she like fucked up the ceremony or something.
Something.
And it was just a look of like real disappointment.
And I looked at Victor and I was like, oh, this is going to be a lot deeper than I thought it was, because she's like, this is going to be about like how upset she is that like this one doesn't have her powers and like she ruins everything. She's not like the rest of them and she's an outcast. And Victor was like, you don't think she's just upset that like this was ruined? And I'm like, no. I was like, there's way more to it than that, because she's like, look at the reaction they're having. Look at this interaction. And he was like, and at the end when it's kind of admitted that that's like was going on, he was like, how did you know? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, it's just this like you learn to pick up on feelings and facial expressions and body language. Like, I could tell anybody who's uncomfortable, they could be smiling and laughing and having a great time, and I'm like, they're not really in the right place, because I've gotten used to having to feel, unfortunately, like that I need to protect myself in certain circumstances. And again, not to narc on my parents at all for the way that they've raised me, but I think there's when tensions are high and people are stressed and your kids are around, they're picking up on that. And and you can just tell. You just and I always know. I could go back to thinking about when I was a kid and I was like, oh, both of my parents are in a bad mood today. Like, we know. Yeah.
No,
like,
kids are incredibly...
Like, I'd even argue that my mom knew when she'd walk in and her parents were upset. I'd argue that so did my dad. Like, I think every kid picks up on their parents like that. So, all right, that's my rant.
Which is
sorry,
it's okay.
Passionate rant.
It's good. No, but you were talking about having you were talking about how kids like deserve to be raised in an environment where that kind of like communication and problem solving is like all encouraged. I think it goes so beyond what they deserve. Like, it's not just that they deserve that, like, they need to be raised in that environment, because those kids grow up to be and I know that's what you were saying, but like it's just beyond what's like, it's beyond what they deserve. It's like, that's your responsibility as a parent, is
Right.
to raise your kids in an environment where they are encouraged to problem solve, where they are encouraged to like handle in the moment emotion appropriately, like, because that's just
Right.
gonna affect the rest of everything forever, and also the way that our earth is run. Like, these,
Right.
you're raising people that are one day going to, you know, run the planet, hopefully, and
Right.
it's so important to raise future generations correctly.
And it's
so
again, like,
important.
and I think that's the other thing too, right? There's generational trauma that exists.
You're off your
too.
Adderall and I'm high, and so this is a real.
It's fine. But there's generational trauma that's involved in it too, right? Like, oh, well, my mom never did this for me, or my mom never did that for me, and then you keep going up that line. It's like,
Yeah,
well, my
they
mom
name
didn't
all the
do that
things
for
that
me,
they
and it's
did.
like, cool, but like, why don't we stop there, and why don't we change it so that we can like fix these things that have been like literally for generation we've all been passing down to each other. Like, I just think it's like really, it's just so important. And so when I was, for anybody who doesn't know what like behavior therapy is basically I worked with kids who are on the autism spectrum, and the way we kind of help families is by creating behavioral programs, and programs meaning like it's all conditioning. It's all like classical conditioning, right? Like basically we're teaching how to either distract in the moment, like if something's upsetting, like there's some kids who will like, this is just an example, there's many ways we do this, but as an example, if some kids like, you know, like just clawing at themselves or scratching themselves a lot, like in those moments we learn what to do, and we learn to recognize, and we learn how to distract and how to enforce that distraction so that they're not having destructive behaviors at home and at school or wherever they are. And that's a very simplistic version of it. There's a lot, like we like create routine and all this other stuff, and there's a lot of patience involved, and it's all data driven, right? So while you're in this job, you're taking down data, you're running these trials where it's like, okay, so how many times did this occur today? When I did this, what happened? Like, and you're watching it kind of evolve. And there was this one case I had, and the mom was severely overworked. And you could just tell she came home from work like tired every day and just didn't have the energy in the moment to deal with all the stressors that were going on with her child, which is totally reasonable. Like if you like, we all work for a living, we're all exhausted, we get home and sometimes something else that's going on is a little too much, you know?
Yeah.
And what
Shout out
what
to
she
our
was,
overstimulation episode.
yeah. what she was missing, and that we worked on, and she obviously, once we kind of brought it to her attention, was that these behaviors are happening with her child because her child was trying to get her attention, and she was just so tired. Later, we can do this later, like, oh, I love you so much, but I don't have the time right now. And unfortunately that was the pattern that was happening every day. So yeah, and this mother, like, she's obviously doesn't mean to do this in any way, but she had a lot going on, and having a child with special needs is is difficult, you know. And so
and it's hard, especially, I mean, you're a mother, like, sorry. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I was just gonna say, especially as a mother, like, just not being able to, you can't, because we talk all day about how you gotta take care of your mental health and you gotta set boundaries with people and you have to do what's best for you, and then you're a mother, and
and it doesn't
really
you
set
can't turn it off.
boundaries with your kids. Well, like, you can. I shouldn't say that, because you can set boundaries with your kids, but like, it's hard because you're also their caretaker. Oh man, that's really tough. I empathize with, or I sympathize with her.
Yeah, and what we ended up doing was we taught the child like basically a routine for when mom gets home, so that mom had time to get home knowing that her kid was distracted and doing something, so that there was this response. Mom's home, I'm going to do X. And it started off with just like coloring a picture for mom, right? Like when you see mom come in, you're going to want to draw her the best picture. And obviously it's different for every kid.
That's
and
cute.
And this was someone, this child just, she was nonverbal. And it was a pretty significant like case. Like it wasn't like it wasn't a high functioning, which I hate that word, but it's hard to explain it otherwise. So for purposes,
I'm not sure.
So
what the
it's not like a high functioning
term
kid.
is.
Yeah. It was somebody who is nonverbal, has very specific like medical needs as well. And kind of needs 24/7 care. So while I was there doing the behavior therapy, she also had a caretaker that was like a live-in. They lived at the house. Because she couldn't be like left unattended because she just can't. She just wasn't functioning
I'm
at
sorry,
her
how
age.
old was she?
She was 12, but
12.
mentally they diagnosed her around like 5 or 6.
Yeah, no,
so
definitely.
she's like
I was
very
gonna say,
delayed.
I mean, a lot of 12-year-olds wouldn't even be left at home. Like, that's still pretty young to be left at home completely by yourself.
Right, but I mean,
and
like,
for someone on the autism spectrum, like, that's not an option.
Right, and the reason I bring that up, too, is just because it's not like one of those things where it's like, you know, if they didn't have the live-in caretaker for her, mom would come home and have to immediately be taking care of her. Like, somebody has to be with her 24/7. So it's not even like mom's, like most of the time it was like, oh, it's more so a support thing so that, like, if mom's making dinner for her other child, and this is also a mom that's alone, like, the dad wasn't in the picture either.
Gotcha.
So, like, if mom's making dinner for the other kid, right? Like, if mom's making dinner for the other kid, she can't make dinner, keep her eye on her littlest, right? Yeah. And then also be concerned where the other one is running around. So one of the things we taught her to do, but like one of the things we taught her to do was to regulate these emotions, to be like, we want you to draw the best picture of how you feel, right? Now we're using like how you feel when mom comes home, because the other thing is mom comes home, I'm so excited mom's home, I want to go hug her, I want to like be around my mom, like, you know, like she's having these feelings as the child, right, who hasn't seen her mom all day because she was at school, whatever. And to be able to like put those feelings onto paper was a good way to be like, mom walks to the door and she would sit down, and this gave mom enough time to change out of her work clothes, you know, like get herself ready, and then mom would come out and spend 15 minutes before anything else, 15 minutes with her, like just talking about her day, just like being involved. And let me tell you, once they like implemented this daily, within a week, all of the behaviors, the disruptive behaviors, the biting, the hitting, the screaming stopped. So yeah, that's awesome. And honestly, like after that, all we really worked on, like every now and then, of course, like things happened. And just, you know, but the other things we worked on after that were literally behavior. Right. But all of the things we worked on after that were basically just, it was like language based, since she was like nonverbal. So it was like learning how to communicate better. We really didn't have to modify much behavior after that, except for like in the moment dealing with tantrums and other things that come up. But, once you find the reason I went on this long rant is because when it comes to just parenting any child, I think it's important to realize in that situation too, like all your kids want is to like they love you and they want to spend time with you, and they look up to you, and they're looking to you as a role model. And so that's why in the situation, to bring it full circle, if your kid spills the milk on the floor, the first person they look at is you, because they're going to use you as their behavior model so that they can learn how to react to that situation. So if that child in that moment is immediately beaten down in the sense that they're like, oh my God, that's the biggest mistake. I can't believe you spilled this. Look at the mess you made. Now, that's our behavior we're modeling, right? We have this anxious, like, oh, I'm frustrated, I don't know how to handle this, I got to pick it up. And then they come to resent when they make mistakes. Because now we're making mistakes, and every time we've made a mistake or we've spilt something or something little, it just keeps carrying over to like, oh, I failed my math test, it's a big mistake and it's not worth it. And it might seem like a stretch to jump from there to there, but when those little things are happening on a day-to-day basis in small like doses, right? Like spilling the milk, maybe forgetting your shoes. You're so irresponsible. I can't believe you forgot your gym shoes today. It's going to carry over into self-worth things as well. So again, you are
that, like,
that
even though
model
that's
for
such
them.
an insignificant amount. Sorry, I interrupted you, but
No, it's okay.
even though to you that is such a small, isolated segment of your life, or like insignificant in all ways, to that child, that's kind of one of the more major events of their life. The first time they spill something or make a mess, and they're not at like the baby age where it's like fine. Like,
Yeah.
that's one of the major events of their lives, and it sucks.
And the other thing I'd like to bring up about that too, just maybe for like...
Sorry, real quick. I just wanted to say, like, I think it's very unfair that pressure is on parents. I think we're delaying. I think we keep talking over each other because we got a little bit of a Wi-Fi issue here. Sorry. But I think that it sucks because it's super unfair that parents have to deal with every little decision is such a major, like, has such a major impact on the children. And, you know, that's why if you're a parent and you are trying your best, you're like, applause. Like, if you are trying your best as a parent,
Right.
if you are giving it your all, that you're doing a great job, and keep at it. You know, because that's the only problem. Like, no parent's going to be perfect, and you can, like, you know, you can't reprimand a parent for messing it up if they really, really tried.
Right. And who's, like, we're all gonna mess up. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
You know?
100%.
It's just, you know, it is what it is. But I think what's important with all of this is also just to realize, like, one of the... this is going to sound weird that I'm relating it to this, but have you ever read the thing about how, like, when they talk about, like, dogs, right? Like, to you, your dog is just, like, a small part of your life that but, like, you love your dog and they're there, but you still go to work and whatever. But to your dog, you're their world. That's all they know.
And their world goes away and they don't know if it's coming back. And that's why you have to pet all the dogs on the street.
Yes.
Please. Even the working ones.
But I think that in a sense relates to your children, right? Like, you have kids and they have no idea what they're doing. Granted, yeah, we don't know what we're doing either as adults, right? Like, we don't know. But to be able to be that support and guide them through those things that they don't know and they learn so that they can be a successful adult and not bring this, like, trauma onto their own kids, like, that's what being a parent is. And I know there's going to be people, you know, there's going to be some people who listen to this and are like, oh, well, you guys aren't parents or anything, and you don't know, and you've never been through it. And it's like,
which is a valid criticism.
That's true, but I mean, we've also been children.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think we look at it in a critical aspect, right? Like, I'm not looking at it saying everybody must do this and it has to be perfect and whatever. I get it.
No, but we can speak to the way children are affected.
Feed my goldfish on time. Sometimes. Like, I'm exhausted sometimes. Yeah. I get it. Sometimes my cats annoy the piss out of me because I get home and I'm like, I don't have time to deal with it. Now, imagine a screaming child and he's 24/7.
And those things are vastly easier than I can't keep my plants alive. Plants require a lot less attention than children do. Like, we don't
I'm not
know.
Trying, right, and I'm not trying to preach to anybody saying, like, I know what's best or any of this, but I think it's more so a perspective. And I think it's important to think about these things for future generations because, again, they're going to be running this world one day. We're all going to be gone. And do we want all these, like, I don't know, I wouldn't feel in good conscience letting a bunch of kids rule this world who are miserable and sad, and then it'll just fall. The Earth will just fall out of orbit, and life as we know it.
Currently.
Yeah, it's not. It's not.
It's going badly.
It's not. But I don't know. That's my hot take. Hot take from John and Emily about parenting.
Good answer.
Good answer.
Yeah, no, man. It is tough. There's something to be said about, like, we all have to listen to kids. Like, people just need to listen to kids more, because there's a truth in everything that they're saying. Like, the little ones, they have no inhibitions. They will tell you absolutely whatever is on their mind. And you know what? That's relevant, because we can learn from them.
One of the little boys I used to nanny the other day, I was over there watching them, and he says to me, and again, I was very frustrated in this moment, and I try to be very gentle with them, but also very firm at the same time, because we have this relationship where I'm practically family now, because I've known them since they were all born, and, you know, it's just, it is what it is, but I had a moment where I was really frustrated, and I was like, if you don't cut it out, I was like, you are going right upstairs or going to bed when we get home. And he looked right at me and he goes, you know what, May, I don't like it when you talk to me like that. You know what? I was like, you know what? I'm sorry. I took a step back and was like,
I don't like it when you talk to me like that. Oh, excellent.
And he was like,
that's great.
And then I was like, you know what? You're right. I'm sorry. I'm just frustrated because, and then I just explained myself, like,
Ooh.
Hey, here's what's going on.
Ooh.
I'm like so upset, and here's what I want to be happening, and you're frustrated, and I want us to have a good time when I'm here because I'm not here anymore, and I love you dearly, and I want to spend time with you and have fun. So here's my expectations. And when we took a minute, and this kid, he's 4. He's 4. This kid is 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And he looks at me and he's like, oh, okay. He's like, I'm sorry. Like when we get home, I'll be better. But like, so he understands, right? Like he understood what I was saying. So again, to take that moment.
It's like, you know, shout out to our last episode about overstimulation. It's not about doing it perfectly. It's about being able to communicate after the fact, and doing it with children. You're teaching them that, like, you know, what happened is mommy had a moment, or daddy, or like, you know, I had a moment where I didn't behave super well in that moment, or I didn't react super well, and I got angry, and I'm sorry about that. This is kind of what's going on, and that like kind of made me angry to you. And like the reality kicked my water. The reality of it is that is really, really hard to do when you can't do that with yourself, alone with yourself. So it all comes back to practicing acknowledging your emotions and recognizing them, so that when you have to recognize them in a teaching moment, you're able to do so. And when you're trying to recognize like why reactions might be coming up in a child, that's when it's going to be super useful. Crazy thoughts.
Yep.
Just go to therapy and meditate and love yourself.
Everybody needs to go to therapy.
Everyone just go to therapy.
Pet some dogs.
Guys, and pet some dogs.
Okay, so the other thing too about that moment that I had his nickname's Yaya. We'll call him Yaya for fun. We call him Yaya. That's why I'm Mei and Yaya, because
Yaya.
Alex couldn't pronounce our names. So
cute.
Emily turned into Mei and Lucas turned into Yaya.
Not quite
anyway,
close,
so Yaya, we get home and we walk upstairs and we're like getting ready for bed. And I brought it up again because I typically, in the moment when I'm disciplining them, one of the things I'll always do is like I explain to them why, right? Because sometimes kids can't associate like, why are you mad? They're like, I don't know. Like, what's going on?
If a kid doesn't know why you're mad,
I got down to his level.
That's like, that can just be really scary for them.
Yeah, so I got down. Yeah, and so I got down to his level when we got upstairs, and it was like maybe 15-20 minutes, and I was like, remember earlier? And I brought it up again because I felt like I didn't close it the way that I wanted to. So I was like, remember earlier when like Mei got really mad and I raised my voice a little bit and blah, 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 you know? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, again, I just want you to know that, you know, I was really upset and it wasn't right for maybe to talk to you that way. And I was like, and I acknowledged that he spoke up, and I said, and I appreciate that you were able to communicate with me that when I spoke to you that way, it made you sad. And he was like, I don't like it when you get mad. And I was like, I don't like to get mad either. But again, we need to be able to listen and follow directions so that we can have fun when I come over. And then I always make sure at the end of that to be like, I always ask them if they want a hug or not, because sometimes they're really mad at me. They don't want a hug. But I always tell them about how much I love them. And typically I give them a hug. Typically they let me. There's been like 2 or 3 occasions where they're like, no, like get away from me. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you're just a brat sometimes. You're just being really mean to me.
You yelled at me, you traitorous scum.
But like this is the difference between these kids. Like when I show up, I think the other thing about disciplining your kids in a way that's like positive, like when I show up, these kids are so excited, right? They're not like, oh my God, May's coming over. You know what I mean? Like, and they miss me. Like, I'll show up and Yaya will be like, May, I missed you so much. I'm so glad you're here and you came back and blah, 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 blah. And like, I think that's important too, right? Because these kids know that I'm not doing it to be malicious, and having that open communication with them gets them, I think they understand better that like, oh, well, it's not like she's just this mean person who's mad about all this stuff. Like, they can kind of comprehend and critically think about why this whole thing went down, right? And I think that says a lot about the way that they carry themselves in other situations. Like, I've heard Alex say to me in different times, like, he'll get really mad about something, and he'll be like, you know what? I'm sorry, but I'm just really mad. And I can't help but think that that's from behavior modeling, right? Like, I have done that. I've been like, I'm sorry, but I'm just really mad right now, right? And he's modeling that behavior. And now he's regulating those emotions that he's feeling. I'm really mad, and I'm speaking out, and I'm telling you that this is why I'm acting this way. And that's really important. Really important.
It's really good.
So again, I just think, you know, that's my personal experience. You know, behavior technician and nanny. May, that is my name. That is on my resume. It should be on my resume. Can you imagine? What's your name? I'm May. I'm May the nanny.
I want to call attention to something from a minute ago. So what you were explaining, what you were saying, is that you were able to discipline the child while still maintaining a positive relationship with the child, where the child was like, the children were excited for you to come over. And so that kind of communication, it's almost like it's building a certain type of relationship, or modeling a good type of relationship where you can communicate your emotions, but then still have fun with that person and communicate. What would you call that? Like a friendship? Implying that maybe you can be friends to your kids. You can be friends with your kids, and then have them still respect you and listen to what you say, and you can discipline them? That's crazy. That's absurd. And that's my biggest problem with when people like roll their eyes at like, oh, you want to be your kid's like friend rather than their parent. And I'm like, no, I want to be, rather than a disciplinarian, I want to be a parent. I want to be a parent rather than a disciplinarian. And I think the friendship part of that, being an ally for your kids, someone that like, you're their first people. Plain and simple. You as a parent are the first relationship that kid has ever had. And that is going to affect the way that the kid has relationships with every person following. And that is a fact.
Yep.
And so part of that relationship needs to be trust and friendship, and, you know, knowing that like and this isn't to call attention to, or this isn't to criticize my parents either. Like, you know, my parents absolutely loved me and were very, very loving as parents. And I think that it like says enough and is a huge success. Like, you know, that said, something that I always took issue with is I was definitely more afraid of, like, if I was getting in trouble for something, I was way more afraid of my parents finding out than I was of like the consequences of those actions. You know, I was terrified. I would have nightmares as a kid of like that I would get detention, which I never got once. I had nightmares that I would get detention, but the nightmare was not focused around like I got detention. It was like the nightmare was around like me telling my parents that I got detention. Right. And, you know, that's not going to dive deep into that. But the point kind of being, I think it's so important to know that your parents will be your allies, and they will, if you are in trouble, especially if you are in trouble versus another adult, that your parents might like take your side and listen and be like, well, why did this happen? And like maybe just entertain the idea that your child is going through something, and being your kid's friend is not mutually exclusive to being their parent.
Right.
Is my statement. Or you know what? I don't believe it has to be. And I think if it's, even in a world where that is currently not possible, I think let's strive to make it possible, because I think it is.
Yeah, definitely.
I've met enough people who say that their parents are their friends, who are some of the most well-adjusted people I've ever met. I've met enough people like that to know that it is possible.
And I think too, like to your point about like having your parent as somebody like you can come to in certain circumstances and you feel like okay going to, like I think that just goes to speak for like, so there's a lot of things, but like there's a specific example that I think about is because I scrolled across these people on TikTok, and it was this mom's TikTok page, and she found out that her 15-year-old daughter was pregnant. And again, extreme circumstance, right?
Tough.
Like that's tough. And people would be like, how are you okay with this? Or how do you know, like, how are you going through this? You're supporting her through something like this. And she was like, well, that's the point, right? Like my daughter made a decision. I've told her how I feel about the decision that she made, but I'm not going to just leave her high and dry to do this on by herself. She's not able to do this by herself.
Help. You're there to help.
And
that's what being a parent is.
Yeah, and she's always like
idiot.
educating people on on how she feels about it, and she's always communicating with her daughter, but her daughter felt safe enough to even come to her to tell her that she was pregnant. Like I don't know if I would have.
Would you tell your parents?
I don't think so.
I don't think I would.
Like at least not at
like
first.
Obviously I physically would not be pregnant, but like if I was with someone and like she got pregnant,
yeah,
I don't think I would.
I would eventually, like I have a good enough relationship with my mom where I've ended up telling her most everything that's happened, but it took a lot, right? Like it took me being in a situation where I would have been like, oh my God, I'm fucked, right? To be like, Mom, here's what I did, you know? Yeah. And again, I don't blame my mom at all for that, because another thing is she's just reacting, right? Like she doesn't want anything bad to happen to me. She doesn't want me to be in situations that I'm uncomfortable in, and she certainly doesn't want me to be in situations that are either life-threatening or life-changing in a way that might not be positive for me. So I know my mom has definitely reacted out of fear a lot of times, and that's something that just, again, I don't think it's her fault. I just think it's something to recognize, because acting out of fear made me fearful of certain responses to things that were going on, which probably could have been avoided if I felt a little bit more supported to come forward and be like, hey, this happened. So I think it's just, again, and I don't think everybody needs to be like, I agree that it's good to be a friend. You should be friends with your kids, right? You should be that person that they can come to. I don't think you have to be your kid's best friend, but I think you should be a person that
you don't
that they can definitely like come to and feel supported like you would your friend, right? Like someone you would come to for advice and like talk to, or like someone that you just value their opinion because you know that it's a safe place for you to talk about things that might be difficult and hard, and like that's where you can kind of break down these things, right? And we also have to remember too, in the sake of giving our parents a break, right? Because again, my parents loved me, like I wasn't in any way like not loved by my parents, you know what I mean? And I grew up in a very loving home, and I always felt very loved by my parents. And what I have to realize at times too is my parents are experiencing everything for the first time too.
Yeah.
Right? like they've never been at least with me as the first child, but or just in general, they had never been parent. Well, my dad, but you know, with my mom,
Yeah.
right? I'm her first
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
I'm her first child. She's never been a mom before. She doesn't want anything bad to happen to me because she loves me wholeheartedly, right? She's going to have her own ways of dealing with that. But also it's her first time doing this. She's learning as I'm learning.
Yeah.
And
it's a lot
same
of pressure.
thing with yeah, and same thing with when she had other children who happened to be my siblings. they they also had different experiences and different things going on in their life, and that was the first time she was dealing with a lot of that stuff too. And it's all, I think it's just as I get older, I realize how much of it too was just it's again everybody's first time, and we're all in this together, literally. Like, we're all learning how to be here and what our purpose is, and how to exist and do whatever this whole life thing is. And there is something to say about, you know, despite maybe having interactions that were slightly traumatic in regards of my parents' fear of things or their own trauma, they did the best that they could, and I grew up in a loving home, and that's really important as well.
Yeah, same. And, you know, they get credit for that. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I think, you know, despite all the things we can sit and be like, oh, they did this wrong and I'm traumatized because of this, I also sit here and I'm like, yeah, well, I grew up also, I did have someone to come to, and I did have support when I needed it, and I feel blessed because of that. And I'm just thankful for that, because I don't think with some of the stuff I've been through in my life, I don't know what I would have done without that. So, wow, a fun impromptu episode. It's kind of a heavy topic.
What did we learn today?
We learned that we need to pet all the dogs.
We need to pet all those dogs, my guys. The mommy dogs, the daddy dogs, all the dogs.
We learned that...
Especially the children dogs.
Yes.
The children. The baby puppies.
The puppies.
The children dogs. I will forever now refer to puppies as.
We learned that these episodes are better when John is high and I'm off my Adderall.
I can't believe we ended the last episode and then just started like talking, and you know,
that was like hours ago.
Some of that, yeah. And
remember
then
when
we were just
going
like,
to be
we gotta
done?
record.
I feel like we should just tell everybody that we were supposed to be done recording at 8:30, and it is now 11 o'clock. Which is fine, but you know. Great. I thought this was good content. This was a great episode. There was a lot of valuable things. It was way too good
for us to not record it.
Yeah, and I think we all learned that we should have a little bit of compassion for our parents, but also recognize our traumas and do better for the future generations. Yeah. But anyway, we love you.
And parents want better for your kids.
Yes.
That wasn't the right wording, but like want.
I knew what you meant.
Strive to give your kids more than you had.
Yeah.
And to put them in a better world than what you had. You know?
Absolutely. But so we love you.
I love you so much.
And we will see you next time on this crazy show that we call Bye, everyone. Cool. Okay, are we happy?